Rain fell in thin, needling threads as the carriage lurched to a halt before Ashbourne Manor, its stone facade looming like a judgment passed before a trial even began. Adelaide Hartwell stepped down with a steadying breath, clutching the worn cloak that had once belonged to her late sister. The fabric smelled faintly of lavender, though the scent felt like an accusation rather than comfort. She sensed the eyes of servants gathering under the archway, their whispers rising like the rustle of dry leaves. They had expected the elder sister, the capable one, the woman who had died before fulfilling her appointment. Instead, they were given the younger sibling, slender, hesitant, and carrying sorrow behind her calm gaze. Adelaide lifted her chin, though the gesture trembled at the edges. Mrs. Penmore, the housekeeper, descended the steps with the air of a magistrate summoned to discipline an unruly crowd. She examined Adelaide with a single sweep of the eyes, one that managed to measure, dismiss, and condemn all at once. "So you are the replacement," she murmured, as though Adelaide were a parcel delivered in error. "The late Miss Hartwell was expected to bring experience. I should hope you understand the standards of this house." Adelaide bowed her head but refused to shrink into herself. "I will do all I can, ma'am." The housekeeper gave no reply, only turned briskly and allowed Adelaide to trail her inside like an afterthought. The manor's corridors smelled of beeswax and restrained grandeur. Portraits of stern ancestors lined the walls, their painted gazes seeming to track Adelaide as she followed the housekeeper toward the servants' wing. She pressed her hands together, willing stillness into her fingertips. She had come for her mother's sake, for the debt her family owed, for the promise her sister had left behind. Yet the moment she crossed the threshold, she feared she had stepped into a world that would expose every weakness she carried. Rounding a corner, she collided with a tall figure, and her basket of cooking tools clattered loudly across the marble floor. Adelaide gasped, dropping to her knees, mortified as wooden spoons rolled in several directions. A gloved hand appeared before her, steady and unhurried. When she raised her gaze, she found herself staring into the composed face of Rowan Thornwell, the Duke of Ashbourne. His presence was like winter sunlight, cool, restrained, quietly commanding. "No one kneels in these halls unless they choose to," he said, his voice smooth and unexpectedly warm. Adelaide rose at once, unable to form any proper greeting. He surveyed her scattered tools before offering a faint nod. "You must be Miss Hartwell." She braced herself for disappointment in his tone, but found none. Still, shame burned in her cheeks as Mrs. Penmore hurried forward, apologizing profusely for the intrusion. The Duke lifted a hand, silencing her with ease. "Allow the young lady to regain herself. The house is large, but collisions happen." With that, he continued down the corridor, leaving Adelaide with a mixture of awe, gratitude, and a sharper awareness of the enormity of her task. The kitchen, however, offered no such kindness. As Adelaide arranged her belongings, the housekeeper's stern voice cut through the bustle. "You have not the competence your sister possessed. The Duke's household expects precision. You may find yourself quite overwhelmed." Several servants paused to watch. Adelaide refused to let her hands tremble. "I shall learn quickly." Mrs. Penmore lifted a brow. "See that you do. The Duke is accustomed to excellence." Adelaide bowed again, but the sting of humiliation settled like frost beneath her ribs. As the morning hours passed, she became the subject of quiet commentary woven through the kitchen's rhythm. A maid whispered that the new cook lacked the elder sister's confidence. A footman remarked that she looked too delicate to endure the demands of the manor. Someone else suggested the Duke would never tolerate failure from one so inexperienced. Adelaide heard every word, though she pretended concentration on a loaf of dough beneath her palms. She kneaded with a kind of restrained determination, as though steady hands could shield her from unkind assessments. By late afternoon, the rumors had traveled far beyond the servants' quarters. Lady Honoria Whitford, a distant relative of the Duke, spoke in clipped tones as she passed through the corridor. "Pity," she remarked to a companion. "The elder Hartwell girl had promise. This one, well, she seems a mere ghost of her sister." Adelaide, turning a corner, froze at the sound of her own diminished worth. She stepped back quickly, not wishing to be seen but not quickly enough. Rowan Thornwell approached from behind the two ladies, his steps measured, silent. His gaze flicked toward Adelaide before he inclined his head in acknowledgement of Lady Honoria's remark. His expression revealed nothing, yet something in his eyes, something like quiet disapproval, suggested he had heard more than he wished to. Adelaide retreated to the kitchen where Mrs. Penmore announced that she must prepare a light supper for his grace. Though simple in design, the task weighed heavily upon Adelaide. She feared every movement might betray her inadequacy. Yet as she sliced vegetables and tended the simmering broth, she remembered her late sister humming during such tasks, her motions fluid and serene. Adelaide exhaled softly and allowed the memory to guide her hands. What emerged was a dish humble yet thoughtfully made, flavored with herbs her sister had once favored. The supper was carried to the dining room by a maid who returned with a look of bewilderment. She whispered something to the others, prompting a sudden hush. Adelaide stared at them, unsure whether to brace herself for reprimand. Before she could ask, footsteps entered the kitchen, firm, unhurried, unmistakably those of the Duke. He stepped inside, surveying the staff before turning his steady gaze upon Adelaide. She felt rooted to the floor, her heart thrumming inside her chest. "Who prepared the evening meal?" he asked, his voice neither stern nor casual, but weighted with something that froze the entire room. Silence expanded around her. Adelaide swallowed, uncertain whether she should claim responsibility or remain still. At last she lifted her hand slightly. "I did, Your Grace." The Duke regarded her for a long, unreadable moment. Every servant leaned forward subtly, breath caught, awaiting either censure or dismissal. Rowan Thornwell nodded once, his eyes lingering on her with a depth she could not decipher. "Then I wish to see the young cook who revived an old dish with new spirit." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Adelaide's breath caught, but the Duke offered nothing further. He turned, cloak swaying gently, and exited the kitchen, leaving a charged silence in his wake. For the first time since arriving at Ashbourne Manor, Adelaide felt a single thread of hope pull gently through her uncertainty. Yet mingled with it was a sharper tension, one she sensed would soon unravel into trials she could not yet name. The dawn broke pale over Ashbourne Manor, its light catching on frosted windowpanes as though the estate itself were holding its breath. Adelaide Hartwell entered the kitchens before the servants stirred, hoping the early hour might grant her a measure of peace. Yet even in silence she felt the manor's expectations pressing upon her. Her thoughts drifted to the Duke's words from the night before, reserved, enigmatic praise that left her equal parts grateful and unsettled. She tried to shake the memory from her mind, but it clung like a warmth she feared she had no right to feel. By the time the household awoke, whispers had already begun threading their way through the corridors. "The new cook startled His Grace," one maid murmured. "He never enters the kitchen," another replied. Adelaide kept her eyes on her work, though every word tightened the air around her. She tried to appear unaffected, but Mrs. Penmore observed her with sharp glances, as though the girl's composure itself were suspicious. Later that afternoon, as Adelaide prepared pastries for the Duke's study, she found a book lying upon the wooden table, an exquisite botanical volume bound in deep green leather. Its pages glowed with watercolor illustrations of rare flowers. At first she assumed it belonged to Mrs. Penmore, but when she approached the head housekeeper, the woman frowned. "I placed no book there. Who brought it?" Adelaide returned to the kitchen, perplexed. The book sat open to an image of a pale winter rose, its petals dusted with frost, her favorite flower, one she used to sketch with her sister on quiet evenings. Tucked between the pages, she found a small pressed bloom of the very same rose. Her breath caught. Someone had known. But the moment she lifted her eyes, she found several servants watching her with barely concealed curiosity. Adelaide closed the book gently, hoping to avoid inspiring further gossip. Yet the murmurs sprang instantly. "Why would such a volume be in the kitchen?" a scullery maid whispered. "And left open to that page?" another muttered. Adelaide pressed the book to her chest, wishing she could disappear into the steam rising from the ovens. Before she could return the mysterious gift, Mrs. Penmore announced that the Duke had requested a particular delicacy from the region where Adelaide's family lived. Startled, Adelaide nearly dropped her wooden spoon. "But my sister, she alone knew the recipe properly," she confessed. Mrs. Penmore sniffed. "Then you must remedy that shortcoming at once." Yet when the request was delivered to Rowan Thornwell, Adelaide overheard his calm reply, "If Miss Hartwell does not know the old recipe, she shall prepare one of her own." The housekeeper stiffened, but the Duke's word was final. Later, when Adelaide attempted to return the botanical book, she encountered the Duke himself in the corridor outside his library. She froze, clutching the volume. His gaze flicked downward. "You found it," he remarked, his tone unreadable. Adelaide bowed her head. "Your Grace. I fear it caused misunderstanding." Rowan's expression softened, though only slightly. "It was not my intention to subject you to idle speculation. I believed you might appreciate the illustration." She dared to meet his eyes. "I did. More than I can say." Something warm flickered in his gaze, too brief to name, yet unmistakable. She stepped backward, intending to excuse herself, but the corridor's polished stone had grown slick from melted snow drifting through an open door. Her foot slipped. In a breath, the Duke's hand caught her waist, steadying her with a firm, assured grip. Adelaide's heartbeat surged. His touch remained longer than etiquette permitted, an eternity folded into a single second. When she found her balance, Rowan released her with a quiet, grave apology. Unfortunately, not everything escaped notice. At the far end of the hall stood Lady Honoria Whitford, her posture tight with restrained outrage. Adelaide froze, mortification sweeping through her. The lady's voice rang sharp and cold. "Your Grace, surely this is not the purpose for which cooks are brought into the household." Color touched Rowan's cheekbones, not embarrassment but irritation. Yet he responded with chilling composure. "I assure you, Lady Honoria," Miss Hartwell slipped upon the stones. "Nothing more." Honoria's gaze slid toward Adelaide with a disdain so pointed it might have drawn blood. Indeed. Yet some staff learned to fall in notably convenient moments. The words stung deep, heavier than Adelaide expected. She curtsied instinctively, but Rowan's voice cut across the hall with quiet authority. "Miss Hartwell is owed respect. See that it is extended." Honoria pressed her lips into a thin line but said nothing further. Despite his defense, scandal began to brew by supper. The servants whispered about the incident in ever-expanding versions, some claiming the Duke swept the girl into his arms, others insisting he had sought her out deliberately. Adelaide wished she could deny every embellishment, but the truth itself felt precarious enough. Even an innocent stumble could tarnish her position beyond repair. That evening, Adelaide remained in the kitchens longer than necessary, scrubbing copper pots with a fierce determination to quiet her troubled thoughts. She had not asked for the Duke's kindness, nor the book, nor any moment that risked her reputation. Yet each gesture unsettled her in ways she feared to acknowledge even to herself. Mr. Bernard Foyle, the estate steward, entered the kitchen, his expression taut. "Miss Hartwell," he said with the stiffness of a man entering delicate territory, "be advised that certain interactions may be misinterpreted." Adelaide bowed her head. "I assure you, sir, I have acted with propriety." He hesitated. "I believe you. Others, however, may not." He left without further explanation, yet his warning lingered like an omen. As Adelaide prepared a tray of evening tea for the Duke, she heard Lady Honoria's voice echoing through the adjoining corridor. "The girl must be removed. The household falters when its staff forget their station." Another voice, quieter but firm, responded. "Miss Hartwell has shown nothing but diligence." Adelaide recognized it instantly. "Rowan." Honoria's retort rose sharply. "Diligence does not excuse impropriety." Rowan replied with a low intensity that sent a shiver through Adelaide though she remained unseen. "She is precisely the distraction I choose." Adelaide froze. The words were not tender, yet they held a weight that defied dismissal. Before she could fully grasp their meaning, she turned the corner, just in time to see Lady Honoria's growing fury and the Duke's unwavering calm. Neither had noticed her presence. Adelaide's breath caught, her heart tightening with confusion and an emotion she dared not name. Whatever Rowan Thornwell intended with those words, one truth was clear. Her presence had become far more significant within Ashbourne Manor than she had ever imagined. And significance, in a place ruled by scrutiny, was peril wrapped in wonder. The storm began with a low, distant growl, as though the sky itself meant to warn Ashbourne Manor of the night ahead. By dusk, rain lashed the windows with unrelenting force, and the wind threaded through the halls with a mournful howl. Most of the household sought refuge in their quarters, for the great manor grew draughty and foreboding during tempests. Yet the kitchen glowed with comfort, lamplight pooled over polished wooden tables, and the fire in the hearth crackled with steady warmth. Adelaide Hartwell remained there long after her duties were completed, needing dough more from nervous energy than necessity. Ever since overhearing the Duke's declaration, "She is precisely the distraction I choose," her mind had been in disarray. Each time she tried to dismiss the words as a misinterpretation, her heart betrayed her with its eager stirring. She knew her place. She knew his station. Yet the thought of him defending her, choosing her, unsettled her in ways she scarcely understood. She was shaping the dough into small loaves when the kitchen door opened without warning. Cold air spilled inside and Rowan Thornwell stepped across the threshold. His hair was lightly damp, his expression edged with the storm's severity, yet something gentler flickered in his eyes as he regarded the warm room. "Miss Hartwell," he said, tone polite but softened by fatigue. "It seems the storm has claimed all comfort but that found near your hearth." Adelaide curtsied, though her pulse leapt. "Your Grace, I did not expect anyone abroad in such weather." "I might say the same of you," he replied, drawing closer. The flames reflected along the lines of his face, lending him a rare warmth deeply at odds with the austere reputation he bore. "But I have found that this room holds peculiar solace." His gaze drifted briefly to her hands, then to the modest collection of loaves arranged before her. "Peculiar because it seems to follow you." Heat rose in Adelaide's cheeks. She returned her attention to the dough, unsure how to answer a statement so intimate disguised in courtesy. "I find the kitchen rather forgiving, Your Grace. It does not judge what is imperfect, only what is sincere. A philosophy I wish more of society possessed," he murmured. She faltered at the candor in his tone. Silence settled between them, but not the uneasy kind. Instead, it felt like the quiet hum of something long withheld finally nearing the surface. Rowan removed his gloves and set them on the table, then took a seat beside the hearth as though he had done so 100 times before. Adelaide hesitated, then continued shaping the bread, though her movements slowed. His gaze followed her with an attentiveness that felt less like scrutiny and more like a confession in itself. "Miss Hartwell," he began after a long pause, "I fear the household has burdened you with unwarranted rumor." Adelaide's fingers pressed faintly into the dough. "I did not intend any cause for it. Forgive me if I have troubled your Grace's reputation." "My reputation," he said with a faint, tired smile, "has endured far worse than a kind-hearted young woman slipping on polished stone. It is not your conduct that concerns me, but the judgments of those who seem to resent your presence." Adelaide lifted her gaze, finding his expression unexpectedly earnest. "I never wished to be resented. My sister was meant to serve here. I merely came because my mother begged it of me. She feared we would lose the income owed to my sister's position." Rowan nodded slowly. "Your sister was admired for her diligence," he said. "But one cannot build a life upon the memory of another, least of all when the living stand before us with virtues of their own." Adelaide looked away, her breath catching faintly. "I fear I shall always be compared to her here." "Not by me," Rowan replied quietly. The simple conviction of the words struck deeper than she expected. She felt the storm beyond the windows fade into a distant hum while the warmth of the room wrapped itself around them like a fragile sanctuary. She spoke again, her tone soft and unguarded. "My sister was the steady one, the capable one. I was never meant for service in a great house. I learned what I could, but much of what I know I taught myself because life demanded it." Her voice trembled slightly. "I only hope I do not fail." "Miss Hartwell," he said, rising from his seat with slow, deliberate steps, "you mistake honest effort for inadequacy. The former is admirable. The latter is a lie whispered by those who do not see you clearly." Adelaide's breath faltered as he drew nearer, though propriety kept a respectful distance between them. The fire cast an amber glow across his features, gentling the lines of authority that usually framed his expression. He spoke again more quietly. "You bring warmth into these rooms, not merely with your craft but with your presence. It has been years since I have felt anything other than silence in these halls." She swallowed, her heart unsteady. "Your Grace, I do not wish to misunderstand your kindness." "I would correct you if you did," he murmured. Thunder cracked beyond the manor, and she startled, instinctively stepping back. Her hand brushed the edge of a pan, sending it teetering toward the floor. Rowan reached out without hesitation, steadying it, and unintentionally catching her wrist. The touch was feather-light yet startlingly intimate. Both froze, breath suspended. Adelaide withdrew first, trembling. "If anyone were to see—" His jaw tightened. "Let them see truth rather than rumor." But the flicker of restraint in his eyes revealed he knew the danger as plainly as she did. Before either could speak further, the door swung open. A young footman entered, freezing at the sight of them, Adelaide flushed with nervous heat, the Duke standing close enough to suggest a moment he could not fully explain. The boy's eyes widened, apology tumbling from his lips as he backed out of the room with unsteady haste. The damage was instant and inevitable. Adelaide's stomach dropped. The Duke seemed to sense her fear and spoke with quiet assurance. "I shall handle whatever tale emerges. You need not bear this alone." "But I fear I must," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "For I am the one they will accuse. And you are the one they expect to remain above reproach." Rowan regarded her with a gravity that felt like a vow forming in silence. "Miss Hartwell, loneliness has ruled this house for too long. If scandal is the cost of honesty, then let it come." Her breath trembled. She dared not interpret his words as anything more than principle. But the way he looked at her, steady and unflinching, unsettled every certainty she clung to. The thunder rolled again, and Adelaide felt the world shift, not with ruin, but with the quiet, terrifying possibility that her life at Ashbourne was no longer shaped merely by duty. Something else had begun, something fragile and fiercely dangerous. Lady Honoria Whitford did not wait for morning to unleash her fury. The storm had barely passed when she summoned Mrs. Penmore and Mr. Foyle to the crimson drawing-room, where lamplight glinted off polished brass and her expression sharpened like a blade. Adelaide Hartwell's name hung thick in the air, laced with indignation. "The girl compromises the dignity of this house," Honoria insisted. "Her presence invites disgrace. A cook should not be found alone with the Duke in such circumstances." Mrs. Penmore folded her hands, hesitant but visibly shaken by the night's rumors. Mr. Foyle remained stoic, though the tightening of his jaw betrayed his concern. Honoria continued, "She must be dismissed before whispers become printed truths." What none of them realized was that Rowan Thornwell stood just beyond the doorway. He had paused only by chance, hearing his own name strung into accusation. As their voices sharpened, he stepped forward, his presence filling the room with restrained force. "Your counsel is noted," he said, each syllable deliberate, "but I decide who shall serve in my household." Honoria turned, startled. "Your Grace," she said stiffly, "I speak only to preserve your reputation." Rowan's expression hardened with a dignity that left no room for argument. "My reputation does not tremble in the presence of honesty. Nor shall I discard an innocent woman to appease unfounded speculation." Honoria's face flushed. "You risk far more than you perceive." Rowan exhaled through his nose, a slow, steadying breath. "It is not risk to defend a woman undeserving of slander." With a dismissive incline of his head, he ended the matter. "This conversation is closed." But rumor worked faster than truth. Word reached Adelaide before noon. She listened in stricken silence as a maid recounted that Honoria had demanded her removal. Though the Duke had defended her, the damage was done. Adelaide felt shame coil tight around her, heavier than any accusation she'd endured before. She retreated to the small room she slept in, where her sister's cloak hung on a peg like a reminder of a life she had not meant to inherit. With trembling hands she gathered her few belongings, folding each item with a sorrow that seeped into her bones. She could not remain. Even if the Duke shielded her today, society's wrath would find him tomorrow. She would not be the cause of his downfall. Before dawn, she slipped silently into the great hall, the echo of her footsteps magnified in the cavernous space. She carried only a small carpet bag in her sister's cloak. The vast entrance loomed before her, its heavy doors framed by shadows. She reached for the latch, only for a deeper shadow to break from the stairway behind her. "Miss Hartwell." Her breath caught. Rowan descended the staircase, his nightcoat hanging open, as though he had risen the moment she moved. The soft light from a nearby lantern traced the determination in his face. She turned quickly, bowing her head. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I meant to leave quietly." "Why?" His voice held no anger, only a weary ache that pierced her heart. "After all you have endured, why flee now? I have brought nothing but trouble." She clasped her carpet bag tighter. "Lady Honoria is right. I am unfit for service here. My continued presence invites scandal you cannot escape." He approached with slow, deliberate steps, as though fearing she might vanish. "You believe I defend you out of obligation? That I safeguard your place to protect my pride? I do not presume to understand your motives." Her voice quavered. "But I know my place, and it is not beside a duke, not in rumor nor in truth." Rowan stopped only a few paces away. His gaze softened with something raw, unguarded. "Miss Hartwell, I have lived years surrounded by courtesy so polished it scarcely resembled sincerity. You," his breath faltered, "you carry no deception, no artifice. You bring color into rooms that have been gray for too long." Adelaide's throat tightened. "Your Grace. You think leaving will spare me," he continued, voice lower, "but it is your absence that would wound me far more deeply than any whisper outside these walls." Her breath broke at the edges. She had expected reprimand, dismissal, perhaps even cold tolerance, but not this open confession, not from a man known for restraint sharper than steel. "I am a cook," she whispered, "a woman of modest means. If I stay, I risk everything you have built." "You risk nothing I value," Rowan replied. "For I value honesty. I value loyalty. And I value your presence more than you understand." Silence pressed heavily between them, charged with meaning neither dared fully speak. She lowered her gaze. "What would you have of me?" His answer came without hesitation. For now. Simply that you remain. A fragile hope flickered in her chest, warm yet terrifying. But before she could respond, Lady Honoria's voice soared from the balcony above. This is precisely the impropriety I feared. Honoria descended the stairs like a specter of judgment. Your Grace, you must see reason. This girl compromises everything. Rowan turned toward her, his expression a mask of iron will. Lady Honoria, you will not speak another word against Miss Hartwell. Honoria stiffened. You dismiss me so easily? I dismiss cruelty when it masquerades as propriety, he replied. Miss Hartwell remains under my protection. That is final. Humiliation darkened Honoria's features. She bowed with icy precision. If that is your decision, I shall take my leave of Ashbourne at once. So be it, Rowan answered. Safe travels. Honoria swept out of the hall with thunderous indignation, the doors closing behind her like the end of a tyrant's reign. Adelaide stood motionless, unable to comprehend all that had transpired. Rowan faced her again, his voice gentler now. You walk toward the door as though your presence is a burden, he said. Yet you have never once asked what I desire. And what is that? She whispered, her heart trembling. For you not to vanish, he said softly. Not into rumor. Not into fear. And not into the night. Her carpet bag slipped from her hand, landing softly on the marble floor. Rowan stepped closer, the faintest smile touching his lips. If you leave tonight, Miss Hartwell, you take the light with you. Emotion flooded her, fierce and overwhelming. Though she did not yet speak her answer, her stillness, her surrender of the bag, was enough for him to breathe again. The storm had passed outside. But within the manor, something far more powerful had begun. Snow drifted against the tall windows of Ashbourne Manor as lanterns were lit for the winter ball, casting warm golden halos across the marble floors. The great hall shimmered with silk, jewels, and the low hum of noble conversation. Music floated from the orchestra like a delicate thread weaving through the polished air. Yet beneath the glittering spectacle, tension coiled invisibly, for the Duke's household carried whispers that evening. Whispers of a cook who had somehow found herself at the center of a storm no one could fully explain. Adelaide Hartwell remained hidden in the servants' corridor just beyond the ballroom, smoothing her plain apron with trembling hands. Though Rowan had stopped her from leaving 3 nights prior, she still felt the precariousness of her place in the manor. Honoria's departure had shocked the household. Rumors had not ceased, only changed shape. Adelaide feared that her presence at the manor's grandest event, even unseen, would only fuel more talk. She had resolved to keep to the shadows, content to perform her duties in silence while the aristocracy danced beneath chandeliers. In the ballroom, Rowan Thornwell moved among the guests with calm dignity, though he felt none of it within. His mind drifted again and again to the moment he had found Adelaide preparing to flee. Her carpet bag slipping from her hand had struck him not as surrender, but as trust, a trust he could not fail. Yet he had not spoken the fullness of his heart. That omission gnawed at him now, sharpening each glance at the empty doorway where servants occasionally passed. But tonight, expectations pressed hard upon him. Several noble families had come with daughters of marriageable age, each more ornamented than the last, each hoping to secure the Duke's attention. Rowan felt like a man drifting through a play performed by others. He nodded where required, conversed politely, but his gaze continued to pull toward the edges of the room, as though searching for the one person forbidden to stand among them. Lady Whitford, a cousin of Honoria's, approached him with a tight smile. Your Grace, she said, I trust tonight may help mend the unfortunate impression recent events have created. Her eyes glimmered with suggestion. There is no better remedy for rumor than a noble engagement. Rowan inclined his head, though his expression chilled. Rumor concerns me little. His gaze drifted again, not to any noble woman, but toward the dim corridor where a certain quiet figure had vanished earlier with a tray. Lady Whitford followed his gaze, her brows knitting. Your Grace, she said with a sharp undertone, if the household staff continue to distract you. They do not, Rowan replied, voice firm. But I owe honesty to those who stand before me. And I will not give the impression of seeking a bride among those who misunderstand my intent. Before Lady Whitford could form a response, Rowan stepped away, signaling to the orchestra to pause. The musicians faltered into silence. Conversations died abruptly. Fans stilled midair. The ballroom froze, the shift in atmosphere immediate and electric. Adelaide, carrying empty glasses back toward the kitchen, halted at the sound of Rowan's voice rising above the hush. My lords and ladies, he began, standing beneath the towering chandelier, "I must beg your indulgence for a matter that concerns not merely this evening but my future, and the integrity of this household." A ripple of surprise traveled through the crowd. Adelaide pressed back into the narrow corridor, her breath trembling. She sensed the weight of his words and feared what must follow. Would he correct the rumors? Distance himself from her publicly? She braced herself, gripping the tray like an anchor. Rowan's gaze swept the room with solemn conviction. "There has been speculation of late regarding the company I keep, and the nature of my regard for certain individuals within my home." Several heads turned. Murmurs trembled like fragile strings. But he continued, every word resolute. "Speculation becomes poison when it is left unanswered. Thus I shall answer plainly." Another beat of silence fell. "I do not intend," he said, "to choose a bride from among the noble families gathered here." Gasps swept the hall. Fans snapped shut. A lady swayed, steadied by her companion. Rowan's voice remained calm, his composure unbroken. "My heart has already chosen its direction," he said. "Not toward a title, nor a lineage, nor an alliance fashioned from ambition, but toward sincerity, humility, and a quiet courage that few in this room have ever displayed." Adelaide felt the world tilt. She pressed a hand to her chest, certain her heart would betray her hiding place. Whispers exploded now, fragments of disbelief and outrage. Rowan waited for the chaos to settle, then spoke again with unwavering clarity. "I have found affection," he said, "not in the ballroom, but in the very heart of my household. In the diligence of a young woman who came here burdened by grief, yet offered only grace. Who endured unkind scrutiny with patience. Who never sought my favor, yet earned it entirely." A servant nearby glanced toward Adelaide, eyes wide. She shook her head, backing deeper into the corridor, as though she could escape the impossible truth unfurling before her. Rowan raised a hand, signaling his steward. Mr. Foyle stepped forward, whispering something. Rowan nodded, then announced, "Bring Miss Adelaide Hartwell to me." A shockwave rippled through the hall. Guests turned toward the corridor where Adelaide stood frozen. A maid touched her arm gently. He means you." Adelaide stepped forward on trembling legs, feeling every gaze like a weight pressing against her ribs. She crossed the threshold into the cavernous ballroom, her plain dress stark among the splendor. The murmur struck her like cold wind. A cook? Impossible. Surely he has gone mad. Rowan descended the steps from the dais and stopped before her. His expression softened, the rigid dignity melting into something achingly tender. "Miss Hartwell," he said, voice pitched for her alone though the entire ballroom strained to hear, "for weeks I have guarded my heart with silence. But tonight I choose truth." Adelaide lifted her gaze, tears trembling at the edge of her vision. "Your Grace, I do not understand how any of this can be possible." He stepped closer, the ballroom fading around them. "Because love is seldom convenient, but it is always true. And mine," he exhaled softly, the confession breaking free, "is yours if you will have it." Her breath shuddered out of her. "I am no duchess," she whispered. "No," he said, taking her hand gently, "you are something far rarer. A woman of worth unmeasured by title." The ballroom held its breath. Adelaide's tears slipped free, not in sorrow but in a fragile, luminous surrender. "Then I accept," she whispered. "With all my heart." Rowan's eyes closed briefly, as though anchoring himself in the moment, before he lifted her hand to his lips in a gesture both reverent and defiant. A murmur of shock rippled through the assembly, followed, slowly, by scattered, hesitant applause that grew into a reluctant swell. The doors to the balcony opened as the wind shifted and snow began to fall, silent, shimmering, soft as forgiveness. Rowan guided Adelaide toward the open air, where the night embraced them in quiet wonder. She stood beside him, no longer the shadow of her sister nor the uncertain cook who entered the manor and borrowed grief. She stood as the woman he chose above all others. And in the hush of falling snow, the world around them finally felt possible.